If you've taken a DNA test and discovered you have Scottish ancestry, you may have wondered what makes Scottish DNA so unique. Why do genetic studies show such intricate layers of ancestry, more mixed and yet more regionally distinct than in many other parts of Europe? The answer lies not in a single origin story, but in a tapestry woven over tens of thousands of years.
Secrets surround us, waiting to be uncovered. From ancient mysteries to hidden truths, nothing stays buried forever. You're watching Uncharted Truths. Subscribe, like, and join the journey into the unknown.
Scotland's DNA reflects migrations, survival, and adaptation, each era leaving its imprint on the people who call this rugged northern land home. Beneath the kilts and clans, beneath the Gaelic songs and Norse sagas, lies a far older narrative written in our very cells. Long before history was recorded, before the first standing stones cast shadows on the Orkney grasslands, Scotland was a land of ice and silence. Then, as the last ice age drew to a close around 12,000 BC, the ice sheets began to retreat. From the south, small groups of hunter-gatherers followed the herds in the thawing rivers northward into the newly opened wilderness. These were Scotland's first settlers, the pioneers of a raw and untamed world. Archaeological traces of these Mesolithic people tell us they lived along river valleys, lochs, and coasts. They built no permanent villages, but seasonal camps, temporary shelters made from animal hides and driftwood, surrounded by fire hearths and piles of shells left from their coastal feasts. In these middens, we find not only the story of how they lived, but echoes of who they were. From skeletal remains, scientists can glimpse fragments of their genetic profile. These early inhabitants carried what modern geneticists call Western hunter-gatherer ancestry, a lineage found from Spain to the Baltic. Their DNA suggests sturdy builds, darker hair, and often striking blue or green eyes. They were resilient, adapted to the cold, and lived by their wits in a land that could shift from abundant to unforgiving in a single season. Imagine the world they knew. Endless pine forests stretching across the lowlands, elk and wild boar roaming where modern cities now stand, seals basking on shores that were still rising from the sea after the weight of the glaciers had lifted. Life was harsh, but community was everything. Their survival depended on cooperation, on the knowledge passed down from one generation to the next about where to hunt, when to fish, and how to read the shifting weather of the northern sky. They brought companions too, dogs, still semi-wild by today's standards, but loyal allies in the hunt. Together they moved through landscapes that few humans had ever seen, forging bonds with the animals and with the land itself. In their DNA, we find the earliest genetic foundation of the Scottish people, a thread that, though diluted by time and countless migrations, still survives in the genetic code of modern Scots. What makes this early chapter remarkable is its persistence. Across Britain, many of these Mesolithic genes were later replaced or minimized by waves of migration from the continent. But in Scotland, particularly in its northern and western reaches, this ancient ancestry endured. Isolated by mountains, moors, and rugged seas, communities retain traces of those first settlers far longer than elsewhere. Their story is one of endurance against nature's extremes. When the world was still young and ice still haunted the northern horizon, they made a home here. Their DNA is a whisper from that distant time, a record of humanity's first steps into what would one day be called Scotland. Thousands of years would pass before the next great change swept across this land. New peoples were coming, bringing with them tools, seeds, and ideas that would reshape everything the hunter-gatherers knew. The forests would be cleared, fields would be planted, stone circles would rise from the earth, and the genetic tapestry of Scotland would begin to grow richer still. By around 4000 BC, a quiet transformation began to ripple across Scotland's shores. From the European continent, likely through Ireland or directly from regions of what are now France and the Low Countries, came small groups of early farmers. They brought with them the seeds of wheat and barley, the knowledge of domesticated animals, and a radically different way of life. To the hunter-gatherers who had roamed these lands for millennia, the newcomers must have seemed extraordinary. They built more permanent homes, cleared forests for fields, and shaped the land with tools unlike any seen before. With their polished stone axes and pottery vessels, they ushered in what historians call the Neolithic Revolution, a turning point not only in lifestyle, but in the very genes of the people who lived here. These early agriculturalists carried a distinct genetic signature known today as early European farmer ancestry, descendants of communities that had journeyed northward from the Fertile Crescent thousands of years earlier. Their DNA differed markedly from that of the local hunter-gatherers. Lighter skin tones, new immunities, and dietary adaptations for consuming grain and dairy. When they arrived in Scotland, they didn't simply replace the older populations, they mingled with them. In much of southern Britain, this Neolithic migration almost completely overlaid the native hunter-gatherer genes. But in Scotland, the story took a different turn. The rugged geography, its highlands, islands, and deep glens, created natural barriers that slowed and softened the influx. Instead of disappearance, there was integration. Genetic evidence shows that Scotland retained a higher level of Mesolithic ancestry than almost anywhere else in the British Isles. Here, the old and the new interwove, creating one of the earliest examples of regional genetic uniqueness that still echoes in modern Scottish DNA today. Archaeology provides glimpses of how these early communities lived. Across the Orkney Islands, the remains of Neolithic villages such as Skara Brae reveal stone houses built with astonishing sophistication for their time, furnished with stone beds, hearths, and storage compartments, all preserved beneath the sand for thousands of years. These people were not primitive. They were innovators, craftsmen, and astronomers. Their monuments, stone circles, chambered cairns, and passage tombs, show an emerging sense of ritual and cosmic order. When we look at these great structures, the Ring of Brodgar, the standing stones of Stennis, or the chambered cairns of Caithness, we're seeing the expression of a culture that blended ancient hunter intuition with new Neolithic stability. These monuments are, in a sense, written DNA, stone inscriptions of identity, belief, and community.
The Neolithic people also brought a profound change to Scotland's landscape. Forests that had stood for thousands of years were cleared to make way for pastures and crops. Settlements began to anchor communities in place, and with permanence came ancestry. Families living for generations in the same valleys, passing down not only land, but also genetic traits specific to those regions. This is one of the reasons why, even today, Scotland exhibits micro-regional variations in DNA that scientists can trace to ancient times. Yet this peaceful agricultural world was not static. Over centuries, the mix of Neolithic farmers and older Mesolithic lines gave rise to a population uniquely adapted to Scotland's challenging environment. Their diet still relied heavily on seafood. Their tools blended stone and bone with innovation, and their art began to reflect complex symbolic traditions. When modern geneticists study DNA extracted from ancient Neolithic skeletons in Scotland, they find a fascinating balance. Not purely continental, not purely local, but a hybrid lineage that marks the beginning of what could truly be called the Scottish genetic identity. These early farmers had woven themselves into the land, both biologically and culturally, creating a foundation that later migrations would build upon. But time never stands still. Around 2400 BC, a dramatic and far-reaching transformation swept across Britain. Newcomers arrived, not just with pottery and livestock this time, but with metal, horses, and a new worldview. They carried genes that would once again reshape the islands from coast to coast, replacing much of the population and forever altering the course of Scotland's DNA story. By around 2400 BC, the quiet rhythm of Neolithic farming life was interrupted by a new and sweeping change. From mainland Europe, possibly from the regions of modern-day Netherlands and Central Europe, came people associated with what archaeologists call the bell beaker culture, named for their distinctive bell-shaped pottery. But these newcomers brought more than ceramic artistry. They carried with them new technologies, new beliefs, and a genetic signature that would transform Britain, including Scotland, in ways that few prehistoric migrations ever had. The beaker phenomenon was not merely a cultural shift, it was a demographic revolution. Across much of Britain, DNA evidence shows that within just a few centuries, as much as 90% of the Neolithic gene pool was replaced by genes carried by the beaker people. That's an astonishing level of turnover, suggesting not only the spread of ideas, but the movement of entire populations. For Scotland, the impact was profound but complex. The beaker arrivals carried ancestry that scientists now trace back to the Pontic-Caspian steppe, the vast grasslands north of the Black and Caspian Seas. Thousands of years earlier, steppe pastoralists had spread westward into Europe, introducing not only horses and wheeled vehicles, but also new languages, and crucially, a distinctive set of Y chromosome lineages, particularly the R1b haplogroup. When these lineages appeared in Britain, they became dominant, especially in the western regions that include Scotland. Even today, R1b and its subclades remain the most common paternal lineages in Scotland, a living testament to that ancient migration. But who were these people, and what brought them to Scotland's distant shores? Archaeology tells us they were skilled metalworkers, among the first to use bronze, a blend of copper and tin, to create weapons, tools, and ornaments. Their arrival marks the dawn of Scotland's Bronze Age, when societies began to shift toward more hierarchical structures. They buried their dead in single graves, often with prized possessions, daggers, armbands, and the bell-shaped pots that defined their name. These individual burials stand in stark contrast to the collective tombs of the earlier Neolithic farmers, hinting at new values, personal achievement, status, and lineage. For the people already living in Scotland, this arrival must have been both shocking and transformative. The beaker newcomers didn't simply settle in empty lands. They mingled, traded, and over generations intermarried with the existing communities. In the process, the genetic and cultural boundaries blurred, giving rise to a new kind of population that blended old Scottish resilience with steppe vitality. The beaker migration introduced fresh genetic diversity, new immunities, new adaptations, and perhaps even new physical characteristics. These changes show up clearly in ancient DNA sequences. Traits like lighter hair and skin pigmentation became more common, while genetic markers linked to lactose tolerance, the ability to digest milk, spread rapidly. This single trait would later prove advantageous in the pastoral economies that thrived in the Scottish Highlands and Isles. As centuries passed, the beaker influence became woven into the fabric of Scottish life. Bronze tools enabled more efficient farming and hunting. Trade networks expanded, linking Scotland not only to Ireland and England, but to far-flung corners of Europe. Gold ornaments, amber beads, and exotic materials began to appear in graves, proof of a society that was no longer isolated on the fringes of the world, but actively connected to a continental web of exchange. Yet the beaker people did not erase the past entirely. In remote glens, on windswept islands, and in the rugged north, elements of older Neolithic and even Mesolithic ancestry persisted, subtle, resilient, and deeply local. This pattern of continuity amid transformation is a theme that repeats again and again in Scotland's genetic story. Change came, but it never came evenly.
By the end of the Bronze Age, Scotland's population was a blend of ancient hunter-gatherer roots, Neolithic farming ancestry, and steppe-derived beaker lineages, a combination unlike any other in Northern Europe. This fusion laid the groundwork for the societies that would follow. tribal communities speaking early Celtic tongues, forging tools of iron, and giving rise to the first names we might recognize from history. As the centuries moved toward 300 BC, the bronze weapons dulled, and a new metal began to define the age. Along with it came shifting alliances, tribal identities, and new waves of smaller-scale migrations that continued to refine Scotland's gene pool. The Iron Age was dawning, and with it, the ancestors of the Picts, the Britons, and the Gaels were beginning to emerge from the mists of prehistory. By around 300 BC, Scotland stood on the threshold of another transformation. Bronze had given way to iron, a stronger and more abundant metal that reshaped society. Across the British Isles, tribal confederations began to crystallize, each with their own customs, dialects, and identities. For the first time, we can start to glimpse the early ancestors of the Picts, the Gaels, and the Britons, whose stories would echo throughout Scottish history. But behind the names and myths lies the steady pulse of genetic continuity. Despite waves of cultural change, DNA from Iron Age remains across Scotland shows that the population was largely descended from the Bell Beaker and Bronze Age peoples who came before. The steppe-derived genetic component, introduced centuries earlier, remained strong, mixing gradually with local variations and shaping a distinctly northern identity that persists even today. These Iron Age communities were the inheritors of both innovation and endurance. They built hill forts on ridges and promontories, defended by ramparts of stone and timber. Inside these enclosures, families tended cattle, smelted iron, and traded goods along coastal routes. Their world was tribal but interconnected, an intricate mosaic of alliances, rivalries, and cultural exchange stretching from Ireland to the North Sea. Linguistically, they spoke early Celtic languages, though the Celtic world itself was far from uniform. The Celts were not a single people, but rather a cultural network spanning much of Iron Age Europe, from the Iberian Peninsula to the Danube, united more by shared ideas and artistic motifs than by political unity. In Scotland, these influences mingled with local traditions, giving rise to unique expressions of Celtic culture: spirals carved into stones, torques fashioned from gold, and myths rooted deeply in the landscape. The people of this time were not faceless tribes. Genetic evidence and archaeological finds suggest a diverse population connected through marriage and migration to communities across the Irish Sea and beyond. The Gaelic-speaking groups of the West shared deep kinship with those in Ireland, while the peoples of the South and East maintained links with northern England and continental Europe. In this period, the gene pool became regionally distinct, northern and western Scotland preserving older Beaker and steppe ancestry, while southern Scotland began to show subtle influences from Celtic Britain to the south. It's during this time that the mysterious Picts begin to emerge, although their name would not appear in written records until centuries later. The ancestors of the Picts likely belonged to Iron Age tribes scattered across what is now northern and eastern Scotland. They left behind enigmatic hill forts, carved stones, and traces of settlement patterns that hint at a sophisticated society. Their DNA, recovered from ancient burials in Orkney and the Highlands, reveals genetic continuity from the Bronze Age, proof that the Picts were not newcomers, but the evolved descendants of Scotland's earliest inhabitants. The Gaels, by contrast, would later arrive from the west, but their story was already intertwined with Scotland's genetic fabric through earlier movements of Celtic peoples from Ireland. Even before the recognized Gaelic migrations, there were likely centuries of cross-sea contact, trade, and intermarriage that blurred the genetic lines long before history took note. While these tribes left little written record, their genetic legacy speaks clearly. Modern Scots, especially in rural areas of the Highlands and Islands, carry traces of these Iron Age populations, an enduring mix of Beaker-derived ancestry and local adaptation. Some haplogroups, such as R1b L21 on the paternal line, remain dominant in the Highlands, representing one of the clearest through lines from the Bronze Age and Iron Age to the present day. The Iron Age also gave birth to the heroic age of Celtic mythology, a time when oral traditions flourished, telling of warriors, druids, and divine landscapes. Though mythic, these tales reflect something deeply human, a people rooted in their land, shaped by its isolation and its harsh beauty. The same geography that once shielded Mesolithic hunter-gatherers now preserved cultural and genetic continuity in ways unseen elsewhere in Europe. By the time the Romans first glimpsed Scotland's misty hills in the 1st century AD, these tribal societies had already been thriving for centuries. The land north of the River Forth was filled with fiercely independent peoples, farmers, traders, and warriors, whose identities would soon collide with one of the most powerful empires the world had ever known. And yet, even as the Roman legions advanced, Scotland's genetic story was about to prove once again just how resistant, how uniquely enduring it truly was.
When the legions of Imperial Rome marched north into Scotland in the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, they entered a land unlike any other they had conquered. Rugged, windswept, and fiercely defended, it was a frontier that even the might of the Roman Empire could never truly tame. And while the Roman presence left traces in stone and story, its impact on the genetic makeup of the Scottish people was remarkably small. Around AD 80, the Roman general Agricola led his forces deep into what they called Caledonia, pushing farther north than any Roman army before him. For a brief moment, Roman forts and marching camps appeared across the lowlands, marking their ambition to subdue this wild frontier. Yet the farther they advanced, the more they encountered a different kind of strength. Not an empire, but an endurance. The local tribes, battle-hardened and intimately familiar with the land, resisted with a determination that astonished even Roman chroniclers. Rome built walls to hold them back, Hadrian's Wall, and later the Antonine Wall, but those walls were never true boundaries. Beyond them lay a mosaic of peoples who owed nothing to the empire. Trade, raiding, and intermarriage continued across the frontier, but the genetic lines of the northern tribes remained largely intact. For all Rome's power, it could not imprint itself deeply upon the Scottish soul or its DNA. The Romans brought soldiers from every corner of their vast dominion: Italians, Gauls, Syrians, North Africans. Some must have left traces, children born of local mothers and foreign fathers, hints of Mediterranean or Near Eastern ancestry scattered in tiny fragments through the generations. Yet these genetic whispers are faint, overshadowed by the enduring continuity of Scotland's older bloodlines. When Rome finally withdrew from Britain in the early 5th century, it left behind more ruins than roots. In England, towns and roads bore the legacy of empire. In Scotland, the hills and glens reclaimed their silence. The people remained, descendants of hunter-gatherers, Neolithic farmers, beaker metalworkers, and Celtic tribes, each layer still alive in the DNA of the land itself. This, perhaps, is what makes Scottish DNA so unique. It is not defined by constant replacement or conquest, but by persistence, by the endurance of ancient genetic threads that other regions lost to time. Scotland's geography, its isolation, and its spirit combined to preserve that deep continuity. Even when new cultures arrived, Romans, Gaels, Norsemen, Normans, they met a people whose genetic core was already ancient and resilient, shaped by thousands of years of adaptation to a harsh and beautiful landscape. Today, genetic studies reveal that the modern Scots carry within them traces of every chapter in this epic story. Hidden in a single genome may lie the mark of a Mesolithic fisherman who hunted seal on a northern shore, a Neolithic woman who tended barley beside a stone circle, a beaker craftsman who forged bronze blades under a rising sun,
an Iron Age warrior who watched strange lights flicker over the Highlands, and a defiant Caledonian who faced the Roman march with courage born of generations rooted in the same rugged soil. Each strand of DNA is a record, a whisper from the deep past, a lineage that survived every storm. The story of Scotland's people is the story of endurance itself, of how the wild northern edge of Europe held fast through millennia of change, its people carrying forward fragments of the first settlers' blood. So when a modern Scot looks at their DNA results and finds traces of ancient hunter-gatherers, Neolithic farmers, or steppe-born herders, they are not merely reading scientific data. They are glimpsing the unbroken chain of lives that shaped one of the most distinctive genetic landscapes in the world. The uniqueness of Scottish DNA lies not in its purity, but in its balance, a seamless blend of old and new, of continuity and transformation. It is a living record of survival, written in flesh and time, a story that begins with ice and stone and still echoes in every Highland valley and island shore. And that story, written in the very cells of those who descend from this land, reminds us of something profound, that even across 12,000 years, through migrations, empires, and storms, the essence of Scotland, its people, its spirit, and its DNA, endures.